Hey, how's it going, everyone? Before we get started into this next episode, thank you so much to all of you who have become extras members and helped the sustainability of the podcast continue on into the future. It's really helped out a lot with a lot of the maintenance expenses that go into continuing on with all this stuff. So thank you again so much for that. And for those of you that have signed up, I really hope that you're enjoying all the new extra content that you're enjoying. There will be more continue to be added into the future, and by now you should also have access to the first audiobook that I've published as well. So hope you all are enjoying that too, and hopefully there will be more good stuff coming in the future. So hope you stick around, and thank you again so much. And for those of you that have been wanting merch, there's been merch available now on the website at falconrychronicles.com. T-shirts, hoodies, mugs, all kinds of good stuff. So if you've wanted to pick some stuff up and haven't yet, just so you know, it is available, and I appreciate your support in that way as well. Now, on to this next episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast.
My sponsor was like, oh, there's a spot. It's in this town. It's really good. She can't miss. Took her down there. She caught her first rabbit like clockwork, right? You know, some old head tells you what to do, you do it, and it works. And then 6 years later on Christmas Day, I put her back up on the same pole line, and she died on that power pole, straight 3-line pole with no transformer. And it's just, my dog died barking up the pole at a squirrel on the power pole. And I go, like, you got to just appreciate the moments of falconry. I think that's like the moral of that story.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks again for coming back for another episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast. And this is the last of the episodes that I recorded while I was in Iowa visiting Ian Anderson and that crew. This was another fun one to do as well because Joe, as I've learned, is a pretty animated and fun guy, and pretty fun guy to be around, really. So it was fun talking to him and getting to know him a little bit for the first time while we were doing this recording, and talking about basically falconry, where he's from, around Minnesota, flying cast the Harris Hawks, and lots of other good stuff. And just so you're aware, there's a lot of colorful language in this episode, so there's your disclaimer for that. There are going to be some F-bombs that are dropped and all kinds of good stuff. So anyway, just giving you the heads up on that. It was a fun episode to record and very energetic, and it was nice getting a chance to talk to Joe about his falconry. So enjoy, and here we go. Well, now that we've got our sound check out of the way,
Onward to victory.
How long did you say that you drove to get here today, Joe?
4.5 hours. Not too bad of a trek.
Nice. Well, thanks for being willing to do that and joining me on this. It's been a nice weekend. It's been cool. Anytime I get to do this and meet a bunch of new people, and it's one of the perks of why I do it, and getting a chance to finally meet Ian and of course, Lance and Frost and yesterday, and then you all today, and it's been fun. So thanks again for coming down.
Yeah, I just really appreciate you cataloging all this. It's like falconry. It only exists if we hear it, see it, and talk about it. If we're all out in the woods alone with our birds, it'll die awfully quickly. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks for the thank you. It's as I'm sure you probably heard me say before, it's been a gradual process trying to learn how to accept thank yous and compliments. I always just assume that nobody's going to really like anything that I do. So it's part of how I stay self-deprecating and humble. So I appreciate that you like it, get something out of it, like a lot of people seem to do, and yeah, I mean it's nice to be able to meet so many people, and nice to be able to kind of see also how falconry has worked in other parts of the world, and get a chance to do all this. And I'll keep doing it for as long as I can afford to, and I'm able, And I mean, like I said, I don't know if I'll die of exhaustion at any point before I can see everything through, but yeah, man, no, I mean, I appreciate people like yourself also that are willing to be a part of it and share their stories and experiences and be transparent, and so it's appreciated as well. So
Yeah. Well, I guess Ian's a really great cat down here, and like it's I mean, not to direct this, but like an interesting interaction between him and I. There was like a Facebook post he put up one day, and it was like, "I'm having a meet in Iowa. I don't know anything about this, basically, but come out, right?" And Iowa was in a really big state. They didn't have a big active club in that way. Minnesota has a pretty active club, but when I saw that, I was like just begging for rain, kind of, for somebody in the Midwest to pop up that was more active, and like it was just the perfect like sprout. And it's funny because like I feel with Ian, we've been pretty tight for maybe 2 or 3 years, and it's really just been like a year and a half or something. It's kind of bizarre, but yeah, like he reminded me this year. It's like, well, actually, it was just my meet 2 years ago. And I was like, oh. Wow, time flies as we're old and stuff now. But yeah, something to direct a little. It's just cool. Like these regional things are sweet. You in Indiana, not terribly far from me in Minnesota. If we can find a spot in the middle, and there are people all over, so it's cool stuff.
Yeah. And I don't mind, like, especially whenever I can cluster and get a bunch of recordings done at the same time. Like, I don't mind making the jaunt, for falconry and falconry related stuff. And I was telling Ian, though, I've made it like a personal goal of mine, though. This year, now that I'm home and working like full time at home again and stuff, and I have I don't know, like more time and can hopefully get back to more of a degree of normalcy. Like I've made it a point this year, though, that I've promised myself that I'm not going to sacrifice too much of like my personal falconry time to do this other stuff. And I'm hoping that other people that I know it'll help hold me accountable to that, because, barring, of course, international stuff, you got to take those opportunities when they come, and you obviously can't take a bird or dog with you conveniently, in that regard. But as far as U.S. based stuff, I promised myself this year any kind of podcast related activity was also going to double as a hawking activity as well this year. So I'm hoping that you and others will help hold me accountable to that, and hopefully be a part of it too. It would be kind of nice to be able to start actually hawking with more people that I've had on as guests and stuff. So
take a trip out here and we'll get you out up to Minnesota, South Dakota, anywhere in this region. We're trying to get more, I think, active and connected a little bit so that we can do that, because there's not that many people. There's less people maybe than on the East and West Coast, densely populated, so you have to reach a little harder. So
yeah, and as I've found, and it's becoming more and more apparent, especially every year, and especially the last 4 years since I've been traveling like all over the place. Like, I don't think people understand just how, can like mentally grasp just how large our country is, and it's funny because I'll be talking to some of these other falconers in like some of these other countries, especially like the UK and stuff and whatever, and like they can drive 7 or 8 hours and be from one end of of like England to the other and stuff and whatever, and I'm like, yeah, well, 7 hours will get me to like like depending on which way you go, it'll get me to like Atlanta, or it'll get me to whatever, but I'm like it'll take me like 30 plus hours to get all the way across the country, though.
You can spend 16 hours driving through Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas.
Sure.
From one corner to the next, which is just mind boggling, right? Like, we're like, yeah, we're huge. It's amazing. It's such a privilege to have a playground like this, to participate in falconry, where you can say like, oh, we're going to go to South Dakota because there's, more pheasants there. Or, we have wild populations of these things on public land. It's like, you do have to, like, that's pretty sweet, pretty unique, pretty sweet. Well, yeah, we're in a moment.
Well, and that's part of the, like whenever I start doing more of like the guest speaking stuff, hopefully, and get a chance to kind of spread that narrative a little bit and talk to people more about, the differences in falconry around the world and stuff. And like, I'm hoping that that's something that like people can start to maybe comprehend a little bit more. I mean, just how, in some ways, fortunate we are that we have such a large country with a relatively low still number of falconers, per capita and stuff. Whereas in some of these other countries, I mean, like, I can't remember what the exact stat is, but I think there's like, I don't know, somewhere between like 15 to 20,000 some odd people, like just in the UK alone, that own birds of prey. And here in the US, there's like roughly 4,000, not even practicing, but 4,000 licensed falconers, and then like even way less of that is actually practicing and stuff. So I mean, and it's hard to comprehend like the struggles sometimes that we're having with losing hunting spots and everything, and we're huge with a relatively low number of people. It makes you appreciate that a little bit more, though, like how privileged we are in some ways to still be able to have what we have. So
it's sweet, and it is like the size of the country is like maybe one of my biggest things in falconry is like not being afraid to go out and just go someplace else. Don't be fearful that you're gonna. I'm actually like childly fearful of snakes. So other than snakes, I'm totally game on anything if it doesn't rattle. But like, I would go as dumb as people always ask me. It's like, well, if it's a rabbit, why do you leave Minneapolis? And like that's a fair statement, because I could hunt more rabbits than I catch every year just in Minneapolis, not driving 3.5 hours to go some other place to catch the same subspecies of rabbit. But it's more like it's maybe that I'm hunting a species that's not particularly cherished. It's not a sage grouse or something, like generally speaking, right? But it's more like the adaptability of them in different environments and just going and then running into people like Ian. In Minnesota, like I really was like kind of, I had a great sponsor back in 2014. He's kind of an old school guy who, maybe is more maybe into the behavior and the management of things than the number count. And I definitely diverged and went a completely different direction. But like the mentality and some of those things that like he taught me were really, really valuable. And then I ran into a guy who kind of shares my same mentality, and his name's Justin Johnson. He's in southern Minnesota, and he's just like a rage driven falconer, kind of like a lot of, some of us are. Like you just every day that you're not hunting, you're thinking about hunting. And he's got a family and he's managing all like the aspects of real life, like a lot of us are. But he was the one that kind of like showed me, and like back in 2016, I think he caught like 300 head with his red tail and his goshawk together. And every time I would go out with his birds, they were just dynamite. And I was like, they weren't like 300 yard, cut the pheasant down out of the air kind of a thing. But I began to really respect just like the proof in the pudding kind of a thing, mm-hmm. right? Like, it's not the most beautiful cut of steak I've ever seen, but if I'm going to either eat bread or steak, I'll take steak every day, even if it's shitty steak. I mean, come on, so that's sort of my genesis of falconry. I had a guy who kind of said all the right things, who taught me falconry, and he did all the right things, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. And I think in maybe his heyday, he was probably one of the main guys in Minnesota too. And then I ran into some guy who's just a rabid, bloodthirsty hunter, and it makes you who you are, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And I mean, going back to your sentiment and what you said about like, well, why leave your state if what you're going to hunt is, rabbits or something, for example,
Yep.
And, to that end too, it takes people being willing to hunt the same quarry in other areas to appreciate the differences, like you were alluding to. Because, for example, like if all people do is like hunt, say, cottontails and, well, say like where I'm at, for example, southern Indiana, right? They're not going to be able to fully appreciate the difference in the fact that, well, cottontails are actually much smaller in, like, say, Kansas or something. They're more elusive. It's a little bit harder to get them in cover and stuff because they're a lot smaller, but they're also a lot quicker and like. Sure, cottontail is a cottontail, but cottontail is also not necessarily a cottontail.
Yeah.
And unless you're willing to make treks out, get out of your comfort zone and get out with other people and see even sometimes, like in that case, the same quarry, but in a different environment and how they've adapted in different areas and stuff, well, you're not going to ever really be able to fully appreciate like that particular form of hunting, species, whatever. I mean, you just know what you know in that one area. So I mean, you have to be willing to branch out, expand a little bit, and it sounds like you're like me a lot, like getting out and seeing other things. So
yeah, and like I'm into dogs and stuff too at this point. So going with other people and seeing that allows you to experience twice as much of sort of those thrills too. So I'm you get into that, right? So,
yeah, for sure. And so like, basically, I mean, that's why I like meeting a whole variety of people, and that's why, like, earlier with Tyler, for example, when I was talking to him, it was nice being able to talk to somebody that finally record with somebody that hunts more beagles and stuff, and actually prefers beagles, say, like, over the dachshunds. And as you know, I've been doing this like ongoing dachshund thing, right? And that, I mean, that's like hearing people give alternate opinions and hearing like a difference in opinion and being able to appreciate the fact that, just because you're hunting the same type of thing or doing the same type of falconry or whatever doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same way where you're at, like, everywhere. And you would never know that otherwise without going and seeing it in person.
I think, like, you were talking about Tyler, like I have a cur. He's like a real simple ground dog. He's more of a flusher. It's not a trailer. He wouldn't work in that cover that he's working in Nebraska. He's got a lot of territory. He needs the dogs to trail, follow one rabbit, push it. Again, it's kind of counterintuitively, I think if you brought the beagles into the rat houses that I'm hawking, you want something to go under. It's almost more like a cactus environment. You need something to dive in, route it out, and get it running the only 50 feet it's going to run for the next pile, right? Back to like our current statement, like rabbits behave differently in every biome. So do pheasants, so do quail. Like, you hear people about, certain quail are so ratty. It's definitely there's so much to each quarry in every biome, and you got to just jump in. It's sweet. And I guess maybe that's like the draw of NAFA, is it forces you to jump into some of that stuff where you normally would maybe sit in your backyard or your 2 towns around and never get to the desert, if you will, for me at least.
Yeah. So, and as we all know, I mean, NAFA and the big meets like that are always more of like a social priority, it seems like, for most people. And, because otherwise, why would you just leave, you can, if you're going all the way somewhere and you can hunt rabbits there, well, I mean, the only real draw to go to something like that is to meet other falconers and to get, that social experience and stuff, right? Without the social draw for some of those things and branching out and getting to know other people and like having the desire to do that, well, see, if that's not your thing, then yeah, there's probably not a reason to go. But if you want to broaden your horizons a little bit, sure, you need to go to those kind of things.
The other thing about him is like, I remember like a couple years back, I was like chewing on Jeff Riddick because we were in Great Bend, Kansas, and it was hard. It was a really hard meet, even for like dirt hawkers, where you kind of expect success anywhere you go. It was brutal. And we were catching some stuff, and I gave Jeff the shit. I was like, I don't understand why we do NAFA in this, desolate wasteland. Like, we could do better here. And, the other thing that you like miss is they have to have the accommodations and the setup and all this stuff. And I think there might be, probably some relationship tending with these people that allow us to come and run our dogs and birds all over their stuff. And, but within that, we're all playing in the same playground at this meet, which can tend to be a little bit of a hard hawking spot, or you run into people at every spot, etc. It creates a bit of its own environment where you're all playing in the same sandbox. If you catch a couple rabbits, or you catch something, it's a success into itself, right? Like, right. I remember the Great Bend meet, a catch was a big deal, and that was part of it, right? So
yeah. And I remember getting out with a few people during that meet as well, and thinking, kind of the same. It's like, well, geez, like this is kind of hard to find game, here and stuff, and just making a side note, nobody needs an excuse to harp on Jeff Riddick. Let's just go ahead and throw that out there. He has no excuse for anything ever. He deserves. He's earned all of his wrath, so to speak. So we'll just go ahead and get that out of the way and establish that also. But yeah, no, I mean, and you can't. The thing is, you can't necessarily pick the perfect places, and because like. The other perspective of all that is like, sure, there's some areas that are more conducive to others, but it's hard to find a spot in a country as big as ours to hold a national meet that isn't just too ridiculously inconvenient for everybody to come to.
Yeah,
and you know, I mean, I know that that way back in the day, they did hold some NAFA meets like more centrally in other parts of the Midwest and stuff, but like, man, you know, I mean, where's the perfect place really to have one? And, you know, if that place existed, would you still have it there every year, or would you still want to diversify? You know, I mean, is there a good, like a perfect answer to all that? I mean, really? I mean,
no, also we have the population density of the country sits on either end of the country. So you got to find someplace reasonable for people from San Diego and people from Philadelphia, right? Mm-hmm. So it works out. And like, it's somebody's always having a lot of success at the NAFA meet. We used to always joke, it used to always be Dave Noble. Like my first few NAFA meets, it was like Dave was always crushing jackrabbits someplace where everybody else was not catching or seeing any jacks. So like it was, you know, there's always somebody who has the hot permission, or some farmer who left the pivots on too long and everything's better on their property. So it's maybe some of it's finding that diamond. Somebody's always going to have a big day at the meet. So.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there's no perfect meet experience. I mean, to be 100% honest, I mean, this might make me sound like a terrible falconer, or just, you know, whatever, but like, honestly, some of the most fun that I've had in a lot of the bigger meets is when I haven't had a bird to fly. You know, there's like no pressure. You're just hanging out with people, visiting with people you don't normally get to see. And well, and in my case, doing these recordings and stuff, it's way easier to try and get that mission accomplished without also having to worry about dogs and birds at the same time too. So, you know, I don't know what the perfect scenario is. It's also hard finding places now too that cater to all forms of falconry, you know, with all of the losses that we've had in different types of quarry terrain and everything else. I mean, I can understand on one hand also why they don't really want to hold any meets like east of the Mississippi, because then you're going to like exclude all your long wingers, right? And blah, 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 and this, that, and the other. Like I get it, you know, but at the same time, you know, it's just, I don't know. I don't know what the if there is a good solution, or if that's even, I mean, if we're even necessarily looking for a good solution, you know, to that. But the moral of the story is it doesn't matter. I mean, even if it doesn't necessarily cater to your form of falconry or how you want to do things, it's still nice to go and see other things that you wouldn't normally get to see otherwise. So,
and there is something there for you. Yeah. Like there's something there for you that you'll have some fun with. Like it's there. And NAFA's sweet. Like it just is what it is. Like we got last year we jumped the gun and went a little early, and then I ended up with some sick bird drama before it all ended, and missed NAFA, and I just kind of felt like one-legged because of it. It's kind of strange. You know, you catch up with everybody all in one big rush, and then you go about the next season, right? But it's the ritual of it. It's pretty sweet. So
yeah,
and like falconry is just the community. I mean, we were talking about that earlier. Like recording these things is a good way to preserve it. NAFA's another way. Like if I just sat up in Minnesota and bopped rabbits all day and never, you know, like relied on, you know, like one grandkid to think it was cool and perpetuate everything, it'd be a dark day for falconry, right? Like, so it's a big piece of it. You know, so I think the part of the solution is saying what Jeff said, and it's like, oh, it's a social event and go and figure it out. You know, like you can find, there is, per like conversation with Tyler earlier, like, there's no rabbits in Nebraska. That's not an accurate statement. Like he knows that. Tyler's figured that out. There's rabbits everywhere in Nebraska. You just got to find out how you're going to hunt them, how you're going to find them, talk to the right farmers. It's part of the art of falconry, right? Is the quarry part. It might be the hardest part in some cases. Some people can stop at that spot and never get past it, you know?
Well, sure. I mean, that's what makes it hard. Well, and that's what also makes it falconry. Yeah, I mean, because otherwise you're just training birds, you know, I mean, you're just flying and training birds. Like people think that the training and all that kind of other stuff is actually the hard part, but in reality, it's actually the easy part. The hard part is actually getting your bird made to the quarry and actually starting to really hunt and pursue and catch things and getting in those situations, and also finding more spots where you can rinse, repeat, recycle. And yeah, everybody thinks that getting the bird to kind of do the basic things and the dogs and stuff to do the basic things is the hard part. In reality, that's actually the part that's literally almost anybody can do if they have some, especially if they have somebody to help walk them through it. But not everybody can find quarry and actively pursue quarry and stuff with their birds. And yeah, I mean, it's that's the hard part. That's the hard part, especially depending on the type of quarry and the type of bird you're hunting it with too. I mean, it's just, yeah.
I am notoriously ham-handed with handling. It's not that bad. My birds stay healthy and everything, but if I have one big gain in my falconry, it's just showing quarry to my hawks. One time when I was like real fresh, our club president at the time, Maddie, is not a lot older than me, so you kind of look to people like in your age group, like, well, this guy's telling me the truth. Let me listen to this guy. And he was like, well, killing fixes everything with short wings. And I went, this sounds easy to listen to. Okay, I'll listen to this guy. But he was right. Like I do think with short wings, killing generally fixes most issues. There might be some instances with imprints where somebody would take me to the mat and prove I'm totally wrong, but short winging is generally, you can fix a lot of problems by out hunting or out killing or repeatedly rinsing and repeating the right process, I think.
Especially aggression-based problems.
Right. And again, like some of those poor training tactics, like I tend to have, I think, or maybe ham-handedness, you'll get smoothed over by finding good quarry, and your hawks will learn by attrition of, rather than one perfect experience after another kind of a thing. But that becomes less the case, I think, the more complicated the hawking gets. So, that's my perspective.
For sure. And certain forms of hawking also sometimes require, if you want to be more successful, a lot more moving parts involved too. Yep. I mean, see long winging and see like certain types of long winging, and there's no real simple like solution or formula or any kind of like, I don't know, just black and white way to really just kind of look at how to achieve a lot of this stuff, because there's so many other factors that go into being successful. And then the term successful is talked about many times. Like one person's version of success is so much different from the other person's versions of success and stuff. I mean, there's people that are out there right now, they don't limit out every day. Well, they're not successful. Well, and there's other people where, if they're lucky to catch a few head of game in a season, they figure that's successful. I mean, it all just depends on what your outlook is on that too. So it's all loaded.
so like falconry is the training of the hawk to pursue wild quarry, right? Mm-hmm. So that's in a can, success is just catching it, something, you've done it. I think in by nature, success for falconers is generally just based on, and that's why I think it's important to like set a goal, try to get to your goal. If you don't get to that goal, then that's your success or not success, because measuring yourself next to other people in a different environment with different dogs, the same hawk, different hawks, different people. Like I've been around enough to realize there's no apples to apples in this equation, really and truly. So have fun with it. Like, and your, Ian, it always talks about like his goal for the season, which I think is badass. It's like, if you set a goal for the season, then you generally are going to either make it and feel like you succeeded and hit your target, or you're going to miss it and you're going to feel like you could have either done more, did more. Like it allows you accountability to yourself, because there's really not a whole lot of accountability in falconry at the end of the day, other than not being unethical about your birds. So I feel like it's really important to set goals. I made a big goal last year, which was, I think a big part of my falconry season. And I rehomed a goshawk because I missed the goal with it. It wasn't necessarily my own personal, it was my own fault that we missed that goal, but it gives you some sort of a benchmark. It wasn't the goshawk's fault, of course, but it gives you some sort of benchmark to say, was this successful and maybe worth my squeeze, or was this not successful and maybe not worth my squeeze, kind of a thing. So
yeah,
that's success to me.
For sure. Well, in that whole avenue of thinking, it's as Admiral Akbar would say, it's a trap. Like it's very easy to start worrying about what other people are going to perceive as you having. I mean, worrying about what other people are going to think about your perspective of success and everything else is just, it's fruitless. It's pointless. Like, that's why I developed the mindset a while ago. I just don't care, what other people or however the other people view like what I'm doing. Like as long as I'm having fun and everything's going all right, I view that as success in my personal, my personal point of view now for myself. But once again, there's always going to be people that are going to try and rain on your parade, so to speak. It's just like, oh well, you only got that many head of game with this bird, but like at the same time, they don't understand like some of the other things you might have had to deal with in that time frame, to even get that benchmark, out of the way and everything else. So as you said, everybody's like personal circumstances and things that they're dealing with are different. And so, yeah, sure, if someone catches like 300 head of game with, whatever and stuff, sure, that's cool. It's impressive and everything, but like, it doesn't, did that person have all day, every day, the whole season to hunt also? Or were they like, this other guy over here that caught, 25 head of game, but also worked like 5 days a week. And, you just never know. It's hard to not have sometimes have appreciation for what other people go through.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like, again, going back to like the clubs and stuff, it's sweet. You do meet other people. You get a feel for what they're doing. You go out and see their hawking setups, right? Like it's everybody lives in their own world doing falconry. And it's really important, I think, to just, as long as things are ethical, remain that positive mindset, because we're a really small community in a really big sea of people. We were just talking about how big the country is. We're not going to like move the rock forward very easily. The best we can do is try to maintain positivity in a good cohesive community to stay where we are and battle for like that position. Because we were talking about earlier, like the UK, right? Like, in the United States, hunting is such a whiny lament, but like, hunting is generally becoming a more rich person's sport. It's slowly across the country happening. It's harder to walk in on leases in Nebraska. There's more leases in Nebraska than there was, 10 years ago, kind of a thing. You go into Texas, obviously there's really no public land in Texas, right? So access, I think, is if anything, becoming harder for us. And so good to stay stuck together as a big group. No reason to crap on anyone's falconry. The more you travel, the more you realize, like, hell, 20 rabbits in Great Bend, Kansas would have been serious heavy work compared to 100 rabbits in Minneapolis, right? Like, that's just a fair statement. Like, there's no apples to apples. I think Ian is like maybe a naturally competitive person. I think maybe a lot of people are, right?
Most people that fly goshawks are.
There you go. So there's this type A goshawk personality. So he was like coming up with one day. He's like, well, I'm gonna come up with this point system, and he's like, because I catch a lot of rabbits. Like, there's a lot of just rabbits, right? Like, I don't have a ton of pheasants to hunt in really good spots. We have no quail. And squirrels bite my boys. So I catch a lot of rabbits. So Ian's kind of trying to come up with some sort of equatable system so we can have a nice friendly competition with the season. Mm-hmm. And he's catching pheasants and shit down here. I'm like, you can't compare these things. Like, what do you want me to like? You get 15 rabbits for every one pheasant. It's just apples to oranges kind of a thing. Success is success. I want to come down and hawk with him and see him catch those pheasants. And it's just not equal kind of a thing. It's sweet.
Yeah, we've... I know in the past, as you know, I've flown Harris's as well, and anytime we've ever gone, say like a group hunting trip to like Kansas, for example, there's always this kind of like little competitive battle, like who's going to catch more jackrabbits or whatever, like the Goshawks or the Harris's and stuff, and it's just funny, like getting into a lot of that stuff, and some people, start to take it way more seriously than what it should be taken. But at the end of the day, like you said, as long as it's an ethical scenario and you're having fun and all that kind of stuff, like it doesn't really matter. And there's people in different parts of the world that are doing things that I think personally are like way cooler than like I'm ever going to get to do. But hey, it doesn't necessarily mean that I need to
You gotta make
crap on it either. I mean, it's just
No.
I mean, I respect a lot of people. Like, I don't know. I think the whole jealousy and worrying about what other people do kind of in some ways, I think, unfortunately, is like a byproduct of other people not getting to do what they hope to be able to do for themselves as well. So
there's a lot of reflection there, right?
Yeah,
like that's a thing, and probably because of the fact that we were talking about earlier, like it's just not equal across the country. Like a person in Great Bend, I keep making this reference to poor Kansas. I'm sorry, Kansas. I love you. I'll see you this year. So a person in Great Bend just fucking has a lot harder row to hoe. Mm-hmm. And that is what it is. And like, so I could see them seeing somebody just constantly posting a picture of their 3 rabbit kill. And they'd be looking at it and be like, oh, this is it's demeaning what I do and how hard I work for what I catch. Mm-hmm. It's really just important to not fall into that trap. Like you said, the animal act trap. There's just no apples. There's no apples to apples in this shit. But also what I'll say is like the biggest part is just go out and with these people. I've been begging Jeff and Tyler Sladen down there to let me come out hawking with them for I told Tyler a couple years ago, it's my New Year's resolution to go out hawking with you. And it sounds a little soft, but it is what it is. Like you want to see what you want access, and you want to see what you have not seen. For me, it just is the allure. Like I haven't seen this, this is something I need to see. Like it's different.
Well, if you end up going out with Tyler, just make sure you don't wear muck boots while you're doing it. Yeah, that's something that'll get discussed in the follow-up episode that I haven't put out with him yet. You'll hear it. Now, maybe by the time this gets published, it'll have been put out. I don't know, but yeah, when I went, I made the mistake of wearing. I mean, I only had muck boots because I was still working in Wyoming at the time or getting ready to, do all that, and so I only had muck boots. I didn't really have any kind of other type of terrain. Because I mean, we don't hunt in like the same terrain he hunts in like that, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm sitting there trying to navigate like rocks on the sides of like steep hills, borderline mountains and stuff, and I'm trying to keep up, and it's not doable without the right kind of shoes and stuff and everything's like anyway.
You'll appreciate other people's work in that regard. You go down to New Mexico. I remember last year I had a chamber goshawk, and we flushed a couple quail for him in New Mexico, scale quail. And 2 flushes in, I said to my buddy Kelsey, I was like, this isn't even fucking possible. This is insane. And then you set in and you realize like that the work that's been put in to get to that point, the fact that it's not really comparable to necessarily anything else. It just is what it is. It's a unique standalone effort put in, and it's really cool. And I tell those same people that share that kind of stuff, like, thank you for sharing it, because you're not going to experience it in Minnesota. I don't have anything like that. Nothing like that. Right.
Sure.
It's a completely different fucking world.
Yeah.
Teddy bear chola. Come on.
For sure.
Right.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, no. And like I said, and in Tyler's case specifically, like it's important for people to kind of share what like other, like you wouldn't know unless for example, like I've been quail hawking before, like in Mexico and other stuff. I've been out with the other guys that do it pretty consistently, right? Well, whenever and that's why it's kind of nice being able to talk to so many different people that do so many different things. Like, people don't appreciate, like, okay, well, they think quail hawking, well, they lump it into one giant category, right? But like, I understand why people like Tyler sometimes are so adamant sometimes in sharing what they do. It's not necessarily for the reason to like, hey, look at me, so much as like, hey, you need to like also appreciate like the lengths and efforts. Like this stuff isn't easy, like, and whenever you're walking like for an hour or two around that kind of terrain to do that kind of falconry, it's not easy. It's just not. And it takes a whole other kind of like skill set and stuff too. And a whole other set of like, a team of dogs and everything else. Like there's a lot more that goes into some of those kind of things than what people can really appreciate. And I think that just people being aware, like just more aware in general of what other people have to deal with in all aspects of falconry in particular can only help the wider community. So
I completely agree with that statement. But go out and see it because the shit is cool in all different aspects. Like if you go chase numbers, Tyler said this earlier, you chase numbers, you're going to see cool shit on the way to numbers. Like if you chase, the perfect stoop, you're going to see cool shit on the way to the perfect stoop. I mean, falconry is so rich, man. It is the richest, most mad thing that exists. Like, oh man, it's so cool. I got into 2014 when I got laid off. And it just consumes you. It's bizarre. I feel bad for my kids sometimes. My kid and wife, wife sometimes. But.
Yeah. Well, you got laid off. Like, so how did you get into all this then? And like, how did you discover it?
So I do technician work, real similar. Yeah. I actually go and I paint the utility lines underground for when they go and they dig holes. So truly like on-site survey work. But so I'd be out driving around my car all damn day, and I just kind of knew the whole metropolitan area real well. It was my job. And in 2014, my boss decided I needed like a season off. This is getting a little prickly or something, I guess. And so they laid me off. She laid me off. And man, I found something. I lived in like a town of 1,000 people, and there was a library in town. I've never gone to a library in my life since then or before that, other than when I was like 10. I owed like $100 to this poor library. So I went to the library. They let me pay my dues from when I was 12. All right. I owed them like $110. Absurd shit. Great River Regional Library. And they had the ability to get all of the books from the University of Minnesota library, which is thick. And so basically they would send these books from the U of M, which is like the cities, out to this tiny little town I lived in. So I could go pick them up at this library and then read them for free and give them back in like a month. And it was probably the only time in my life I've read much with like a fervor. And I went to an event. So like I got into it in like I got laid off in December. I made it to our February meet, which in Minnesota is the last meet, and January meet, pardon me. It's not the last meet. It's the second to last meet. It's a 1-day meet. And I went out there and you don't know anything about falconry before you know. This is what we're talking about, right?
Sure.
So I had loafers on and no long johns, just jeans and like a sweater. And like my buddy Justin, to this day, he saw me that day and he like made fun of me, and they were like talking about me at a different table. Like, look at this guy. What is he going to do? And so this lady, Lena, took me out in her van, and I watched the guys from Minnesota. We would drive to these farmsteads out in the middle of sections and ask for permission. Hopefully they didn't have cats and chickens. And then like the guys would put their red tails up, and like I watched like 4 red tails in a row donk a rabbit out in the middle of the country with like 14 cars driving this, parade through rural Minnesota. Like 10 people would say no, and then one person was like, yeah, this is so cool, like go for it. And it was like halfway through, my feet were like frostbitten and bitten, and Lena's like, you should sit in the car because it looks like you're really cold. And like I just couldn't get out of the 10 inches of snow on the ground with my slippers. It was totally what I had to do. You just knew, like, so then that was 13. That would have been sometime in 13, and then in 14. By that time next year, I had my own red tail at the meet, which was pretty cool. And I'm like, by nature, I'm a participant. So like we made the comment earlier about like NAFA and not going with the bird. I think it would be like maddening to me. So like I use that to kind of like drive my movement of things. But yeah, I had a bird and then flew a red tail for a few seasons. I made the mistake of sort of soft imprinting a red shoulder hawk. I've flown 2 Goshawks, 1 imprint, 1 chamber. I had success generally with most of my hawks, but like my Goshawks for me weren't necessarily worth the squeeze. Caught a lot of ducks with one, but he was a specialist. The other one was gamey as hell, but was just kind of a typical Goshawk. Didn't want me, like somebody, I would approach him and he would leave me.
Yeah.
So, that brutality, flown a couple of red tails, and I've settled on these 2 Harris hawks, which their wick will burn out in a year or two. You can only like rabbit bash for so much, but there's a lot of like cool nuances in the social interactions of these Harris hawks. I'm kind of settling down on that, and then I think I'll put in for the Passage Peregrine take this year, and if I can get that, I'm going to try to get a non-tundra peregrine. So it's kind of hard to do in Minnesota, but it can be done with the right like approach and trapping in the right areas and stuff. So so that's my falconry. I got in 2014. Somehow it's 10 years later, and I realized I have to get a renewal as a master falconer this year. So how about that?
Yeah. It's And going back to it a little bit, like we use the word success again, and you used it again just a minute ago. But I mean, what's your personal view for yourself anyway of success? Like, what do you consider a successful season for yourself? Like, what's your version of that?
Yeah, so I think this is like the highlight of everything. For it's important just to decide it for yourself and do it. So for me, at the beginning of the season, I set a goal. And I'm a dirt hawker and kind of like a desperate dirt hawker, right? So my goals are usually, I don't want my birds to die. I fly around obstacles and death every day, right? I don't fly poles or fields with power poles. Like, I'm real unique in that. I've lost almost lost one bird, lost another bird to them. So I'm really, really specific. So my success this is like the oldest, most frustrating cliche, is getting the bird back. But in the process, if you don't commit or if you don't produce falconry, it's, that's not, you're not winning, right? So you have to catch stuff. I run a dog, so my dog and my hawks have to be they have to have that fidelity, right? Mm-hmm. And that to me is a success. There are days where I'm out like running with my Harrises and my dogs. The Harrises are catching mice and I'm just beating my brain into the ground because the dog pokes up a rabbit right in between both Harrises chasing a huge fat vole on the ground. That's not success. That's like failed falconry, or that's me in the wrong field at the wrong time. The success is definitely meeting the goals that you set for yourself, I think, chiefly. And then, you got to go in there. You got to get that fidelity going. Like, that's what we're doing, right? The dog needs to push the quarry, the hawk needs to be there for it to happen. And this is maybe one thing I think you talked to Tyler earlier, and I guess him and I just disagree on this. If you don't see it, I don't quite think it was like, what was the point kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Like, I've got tons of shit out of sight and I've got there hooping and hollering like, shit, yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I know it sounds kind of maybe depraved, but like, the spectacle is for our observation, just like you telling these stories again and recording them. If it doesn't happen in front of you, so I want my dog to flush it. I want my hawks to cut it down, and I want to get in there without a squabble between my birds and pick up the quarry. My worst days are mouse catching, somebody coming out and yelling at me, chasing me off. My falconry for me is like blood pressure lowering. Mm-hmm. And that's maybe why I'm flying Harrises and my Goshawks to just drive me nuts, is because it's either my blood pressure is going down on one hand or my blood pressure is going up on the other hand. So,
yeah.
But yeah, that's my definition of falconry success would be, you got to get your whole crew that fidelity rolling, because that's just awesome. And then you set your own goals and meet them. And if you don't meet them, be honest and don't shit yourself, because you're just going to cost yourself at the end of the day, right? You got to be honest. And if you didn't make a goal, try to figure out why you didn't do it, right? Go talk to your friends, figure out what they think you fucked up on, etc. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of people a lot of times equivalate success with like a number,
yeah.
Right? And for me, it's hard to do that anymore. And maybe it's just because over the last 4 years, especially, I've gained this like appreciation for circumstances and working around, like I've also learned that if it's too much of an obstacle, you shouldn't do it, for a season or something.
The red shoulder imprint.
Yeah.
It's juice not worth the squeeze.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to certain things, like, I think people oftentimes think if they don't reach a certain number, they failed or whatever. For me, it's not even so much a number anymore. It's more based on consistency. And I think for me, it's mainly because of the last 4 years and having to travel around the country and try and juggle all these different things at the same time and still trying to have consistency. So, for me, like, it's success is being able to consistently do throughout each week of the falconry season what I really want to do. Consistency for me is like at least being able to hunt 3 or 4 times a week around my work schedule and have a decent hunt. And my decent hunt means like everybody does what they're supposed to do. And it may not always result in game in the bag, but if I can get my team to go out and do what they're supposed to do, actively pursue quarry consistently 3 to 4 times a week. And the thing is, the reason I don't equivalent a number to that anymore, is because I know inevitably there will be numbers that result from that. But I find that I don't have as much fun if I put a number to that.
Like, so as a number driven guy, right? Like historically, because if not, I fail kind of a thing. I completely agree with the statement though, because like everybody will tell you, like, as you come in and you start your falconry, you're like, oh, number. I got this many hawks or this many rabbits. Well, if you do it enough years, you do realize it's just it's a product of how much time you were in the field. So it's a product of how, this sounds so weak, but how privileged you are. I'm really privileged. I spend 4 or 5 hours in the field for 6 months of the year. Like, I don't know how my wife or kid even sometimes allows me to do that, right? Like, I think about that, 6 months, holy shit. So that's I completely agree with you. Like, if you're hunting your hawk and having success 3 or 4 days a week, it's almost more difficult. Like, we talk about the killing makes things easier. I think it's more challenging to do things on more of a difficult schedule. My experience, I started off kind of 3 days a week, and it was so much harder than being able to go every day. Like certain birds too really settle into schedules and routines and things like that, right?
Yep, for sure.
So yeah, certain species more than others too.
Yeah. It's just, and like you said, it's a byproduct of the more time you put in, the more you're going to get out of it, and that it applies to falconry just like it does almost everything else in life. I mean, if you're able to get out for 4 hours a day every single day with your bird, by the end of that season, if that bird is not a well-oiled machine, and that whole process isn't almost like, if you can't almost go out in your sleep and have your hunting routine down, if you're hunting 4 hours a day for 6 months, there's something wrong with either you or the bird, one or the other. Like something's not right somewhere, because by the end of that season, you should be able to almost in your sleep do everything you're supposed to do. That your numbers by default should automatically be pretty damn high by the end of that season. So
I think there's a bit of a diminishing return. So like last year, I realized that there is a point, like, so it's interesting to say. So I've heard it said rabbits are like the most deadly quarry. And my personal experience is I agree with that statement. I've seen 3 birds die to rabbits.
As
right?
have I.
No birds die to jackrabbits. I've never seen a bird. I've seen a bird hit a fence once chasing a bird, but didn't die. 3 birds die to rabbits, like immediately following the rabbit slip. So I feel like pursuing that quarry for an extended period of time over and over and over and over and over, you're going to put a certain amount of, if you don't lose a bird, I lost a bird, or I didn't lose a bird, I had a bird get a catastrophic leg break, and the Raptor Center miracle fixed the bird. Like, huge props to the Raptor Center in Minnesota. But enough of a season, 4 hours a day for 6 months of the year, the birds will suffer sort of just like wear and tear issues, right? It almost becomes like a different type of management. And I don't necessarily know, having done it, I don't necessarily know if that was really worth the squeeze either, just to be completely honest with you. Like, so my one Harris came out of the chamber about a month ago with like a swollen hallux, and effectively was like it was kind of like a trauma / infection injury. We treated it with like anti-inflammatories and bacterial medication, and it fixed it. But it was effectively just like, how many times can you grate your foot against the ground over a 6 month season, 4 hours a day? So there's you put that many rabbits in front of the bird, that much injury. It's interesting. You say you end the season swinging or in full fashion, you almost limp to the end of the season because you got a half injured bird on one end, the other one's got the leg all torn up. And I mean, I say it fully committed to trying again this year to push as hard as I possibly can. But you learn shit, like you learn that wear and tear is an actual thing. It's not just about how many stumps did they hit while trying to catch that rabbit. It's actually about how many times they bottom their talons out on the pavement or the bike path or the gravel road or the, whatever driveway, right? There's a wear and tear with that again, maybe pushes the ethical factor of things. Like, I don't know, but it is for entertainment, and it's for us in a weird way. And that's kind of the nature of it, I guess. I don't want to say something that I'll regret eternally, but it is what it is. We live in this society where we're out having fun doing this. We're not collecting dinner, for crying out loud.
Well,
so,
and yeah,
you know?
and that's I've made that point many times too. It's like we're not out in the field curing cancer 4 hours a day, 7 days a week, or whatever the case is. And you make a good point with that too, because I think a lot of people forget that these animals are, also living things, and they, I mean, hey, they get sore also. Like, they don't feel necessarily or process pain maybe the same way that we do, but doesn't mean they don't experience it. Doesn't mean they don't wear down.
Yep.
I mean, it's just like us, like, we don't spend, the people that spend 4 hours in the gym every single day lifting weights or whatever, I mean, they're eventually going to stop putting muscle on. They're going to wear down. That you're not giving yourself any time to recover, right? Well, and when you think about it too, I mean, do these hawks and these falcons, like, for 4 hours every single day, 7 days a week, hunt constantly every day like that? No. Like, if like a hawk catches a squirrel or a rabbit or something and crops itself up in the wild or whatever, like, it's not going to be out the next day hunting 4 hours again. Like,
it's on owl patrol for 2 days. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. I mean, so, and that's the thing too. It's just like, and it's just like, I think I talked to Fincher about this one time too. It's just like, I mean, he takes a couple hundred head of squirrel every season, and he hunts almost all day every day, with multiple birds.
He's got a buddy too, so they get into it big time.
Him and Dave do, I mean, same kind of thing, but he acknowledges the fact too. It's just like, no bird is going to go out, like, no wild redtail is going to go out and catch 2 or 3 squirrels like daily, you know?
Yes,
I mean,
correct.
I mean, we forget that there is a certain limit to practicality sometimes when it comes to all this type of stuff. And sure, if you're imprinting a goshawk, for example, well, yeah, that goshawk, sure, it's going to want to kill more than one thing, oftentimes each day or whatever. But most passage birds, they're fine just catching one thing every couple days or so, like.
I think so. In the numbers chase that I say I worship, I don't really worship it. I don't mean that in a negative way, but like this numbers chase that I go for, I actually think that my birds hit their peak in November. So they peak mid-season when the cover is medium, before the cover is dropped and the mice are visible, because those are easy targets. Mm-hmm. They peak in that mid-season before the wear and tear pulls them, I think, into the ground. As bizarre as that sounds, like I've gone on so many trips where mid-season I'll have them tearing after everything in sight. And then February I'll go to like a sweet trip to some sweet honey hole in the middle of nowhere where nothing has been chased. And I'll wonder why they're watching whitetails bound away casually, And it's like, oh, well, it's because they got shitwumped by that turkey a month ago, Like it's just they too, they don't process pain the same as us. But like, you can't, like, in 2018, I flew a goshawk and I fell into a creek, crossing the creek to get a duck one time, and my knee swelled up like a baseball bat. And I've never had like a knee injury, and it was horrible for like 6 weeks. It was just, honestly, it was horrible the whole season. And then into the summer, it would still like swell up like a baseball, like water on the knee. And it's that effect. Like, if you go and you duff yourself in a creek, eventually your hawk is going to probably encounter something similar to that. And like, that's where I tell you about this my old school sponsor was never afraid to say, like, well, did it look like it fucking hurt? I was like, yeah, it looked like it really hurt. Well, then that's why she didn't chase the next rabbit, right? Yeah. Like, that's a reality. Like, they are not a machine, right? I have a drone that I'm going to try to fly with my hawks. That's an actual machine. They don't do what you want them to do. Even Harris hawks that only ever chase the quarry, there's something that will stop that at some point if you're not aware of it or in tune to it. So yeah, that's probably the one thing I've learned in like the last 2 or 3 seasons, just number running, driving all over the Midwest, trying to number run, is like the wear and tear on them. And maybe if I had 2 females, they'd hold up a little better to it, but the wear and tear is real. So I'm going to add a 3rd hawk this season and try to not do so much late season hunting. We'll see how it goes, but
God,
yeah. So, but
yeah, I don't know. Like I said, everybody I think goes through that phase where they care about the numbers and stuff, and great. I think that, sure, if you want to focus on numbers, that's fine. But at the same time, what's the logic behind the focus on the number? Like, are you focusing on the number just because you want to get that number, or are you focusing on the number because you know that you're able to put in the time?
You said A there. Type A person. I mean, it's you, right? The answer is you. It's like, it's me, right? Like, it's not the Hawks. We've just established that, right? Like, 100%. The Hawks want to catch and eat and be done.
Right.
And I've seen thousands of kills, my Hawks and others, and there is no argument that anyone can humanly make to me to say that bird wants to go and do it again, except for the falconer wants to go and do it again. And I'm okay with that. Like, I don't mean that to be a negative thing. Like, it is because of me. If somebody asked me, like, why are we going again? Because there's 4 hours left of daylight, baby. I'm an enraged hunter. But you do realize that, it is sort of a time in the field. And that's where it's sweet to, like, okay, if I got 4 hours to hunt a day, maybe the last 2-3 years, you start to realize, like, oh, I want to find a local guy to go and run into for 2 of those 4 hours. See somebody else's falconry, see somebody else's product, other people's goals, what they're doing. It's so sweet to go out with other people that are legit. Like, I don't say legit hawkers, like, I go out with anybody. I don't give a shit. Like, I'll see any type of really highbrow falconry, really lowbrow falconry, but I just love it. It's so cool to go out with other people. One of the best pieces of falconry advice I ever got was from my buddy Justin, and it's not even falconry, it's real life advice. It's, you can learn something from every person. 100% accurate. Like Gabriel Atkinson, not going to call him out on this podcast, but he taught me shit at NAFA, and he's an apprentice that year, right? Like, you can just, if you listen to what people are doing, you go out with other people. Another thing my sponsor probably threw at me was, like, go out with other people, see shit. You'll see either what you want to do, what you don't want to do. You'll see what the ceiling is, what the basement is. Like, go out, see other people's falconry, like, set a goal that is to maybe not hit a number, but to go out with 10 other hawks that you've never seen fly, right? Like, the first Harris hawks I ever fly were my own Harris hawks, which to me is just a bizarre reality. But in Minnesota, not a lot of people fly Harris hawks. So it's like, go out, see the shit, see how somebody else is doing it. The product is different across this massive country. It's so completely different. One of my goals for this next year, and I don't know if I'll pull it off this year, but last year was to get to the THA meet, which we were talking about earlier, because, like, you kind of view a few meets as maybe like the paramount meets in the country. And, like, to me, the Pennsylvania Hawking Trust, the Tahoe meet for California seems like a big deal, and that Texas meet are, like, kind of the 3 in the United States that are, like, kind of regional meets that I would say. Oh, and the Great Lakes meet, right? I've been to the Great Lakes meet. Those are meets, like, you're chasing these meets, you want to meet these other people. Yeah, there's same quarry everywhere, right? But it's the meeting of the people. It's the seeing the Salukis that don't exist in Minnesota, It's like shit like that, right? Like, follow Paul Domsky around for a couple hours and see his dogs, stuff. That's what's falconry is so sweet. It's such a rich. We got ancient hawks, ancient dogs, ancient quarry, and ancient people. It's pretty sweet, right? Like, it is sweet. It's so cool. It's so old school. I used to play shitload, like, that was my falconry genesis. Was probably, I played, like, a ton of video games and a lot of time filling, right? You're, like, kind of working a lot and then filling time, and then you have a kid and you're working and filling time, and then spending time with your kid and doing that kind of thing. But, like, it's cool. Like, I found an endless well to dump time into that actually can take it. And that's amazing to me. Like, the fact that falconry exists, like, you can't find a video game, and you can find video games you can put 40 or 100 hours into, and then digitally it's erroneous after 3 years, right? And you're like, oh, that was so cool, that video game. Like, falconry is, you could dump 1,000 hours into this thing, and you haven't even scratched the surface, right? Sladen put this thing up about his pickup a couple weeks ago online, and I couldn't believe it. I told one of my buddies, Justin, about it. I was like, he said his pickup is a 2022. It's got 150,000 miles on it. Fuck yeah. Like, that's 75,000 miles a year. That's so rich. Like, that's the best. And I mean, he does some dog transport and stuff, but it's mostly hawking. and work. But what I mean, like I put on 30,000 last year, and if I had to put on 40, I bet I'd have had more fun. So it gives you a cool angle. In the same regard, I think my third year I got married, and I was only able to hawk maybe like I caught like 20 some head. And for me, it felt like a back set because of a numbers game, right? But I made all the meets in Minnesota, and like you can do a lot with a little in falconry. You can also do a lot with a lot, and that's pretty sweet. You go to NAFA, you see that, right? You see people that are literally pulling their hawks for the first time in the season and getting out and catching a rabbit. First rabbit of the year at NAFA, right? You got other people, maybe more like me, that depravedly started on September 1st in the sweaty pickery, and they've got dogs without hair because there's so many burrs in them. And I mean, it's just, yeah, falconry is all sorts. You just gotta encourage each other to continue like to strive. And I think we're the only country. Maybe Africa has some really, really rad falconry, but
it does.
We're one of the only falconry places where you're still almost innovating falconry. Like, I don't know, that's arrogant to say that, but like maybe Africa is, but we can do shit here. We can still chase the dragon here. And if in the UK, I don't know if you can necessarily do that unless you got a lot of money. I don't. So it's like, that's my game, right?
I to kind of like piggyback off that thought, and I think what you're probably like, trying to say more so than anything else is that we still have the most freedoms to be able to pursue it more so than a lot of other countries. And without a lot of the other restrictions that a lot of other countries face. And that's once again, going back to, I really want to try and keep spreading that message because, there's a lot of things that a lot of countries don't have the privilege to be able to do anymore that we still do.
Yeah.
And, like there's pros and cons to everything, but like, I would say as a whole, like as far as like a full package of being able to like still have IS take, wild take, lots of different, public land,
native,
so on,
non-native quarry.
Yep. So on and so forth. I don't know if many other countries exist at this point that, per the rules, regulations, and everything that are in place, allows you to do all those things with the different types of abundance and variation of places to hunt still, even though it's shrinking, with a different variety of quarry. It's hard to beat for sure. I mean, South Africa, they can still take wild quarry or take have wild take and stuff and have a wide variation of quarry and things like that also, but they're restricted in other ways too, like they can't really do IS take and stuff and things like that for the most part. But all that being said, I do agree with you. I mean, we need to make sure that we're doing what we can to not just preserve but also appreciate what we have. And there's a lot of I do have concerns personally that there's a lot of starting to be a little bit of a trend of taking for granted what we have in some ways. And so I hope that I'm wrong about that, but
in Minnesota we're struggling with this interesting, we have a dissonance with our regulatory commission. So our Natural Resource Department in Minnesota is just they're not great customer servants, being honest in the moment, right? It's really not anything beyond that. We're just struggling a little bit with like, how soon do you get response on day 5, right? All right. So I was listening to some of the old interviews you did with Shelley and stuff. And I felt like I kind of hope my club president listens to this one, because we are struggling with the DNR in our state. However, innately we are at a loss point. Like hounds keepers, hunters, I feel like we are kind of holding back a tide of people that are not necessarily very aware of what we do or why we do it or the nuances of it. Okay. And so like going back to post things intelligently, right? Like share things intelligently. There's no reason, I'm weird. Like, all right, let's say something on record. Everybody understands the training value of animals being dispatched by a hawk, right? I don't understand the training value of an animal being dispatched by a hawk on a video. That's a fair statement, right? The only training value of that is not good publicity for the community. So like, I feel like it's our responsibility to keep on that, keep it positive, keep the community at whole, like succinct. We're not all doing the same shit, but it's training hawks to catch wild quarry. You got to catch what wild quarry you have. You know, a while back, some guy from Germany like put some posts on Hardcore Hawkers about, does anyone hawk crows with a red tail? And like, this is a classic. Like back in Minnesota, for some reason, all the Minnesotans used to drive around in big ass doored Cadillacs and throw out their hawks out the car window and catch crows. Apparently, I have never done it, never seen it. That's literally what I said. I said, the old dudes in Minnesota talk about this shit like it was just yesterday. You know, classic. Back in the 80s, we used to crush crows with red tails. And what does this dude, like 2 weeks later? This falconry is so awesome. What does this do 2 weeks later? Dead crow, red tail hawk. I'm like, what? He said something about like, well, there's been a disease that killed all the rabbits in Germany. The only access to rabbits is really complicated, but crows are more or less wide open, right? Mm-hmm. Go try it, figure it out. And he figures it out like instantly, you know, no direction, just, yeah, somebody did it. And then you find a way. It's so cool. Falconry is so cool for that reason.
Yeah, long winging with crows or on crows is a big thing over there too, from what I hear too. But anyway,
yep.
Yeah, I mean, you just got to do what you are able to do.
Yes.
And anyway, I mean, I know we can keep going on about all this stuff for like ever, but before we start to wrap things up and everything, I got to get your story or two, for hunting experience, whatever, memory, and piece of advice, and then we can start to wrap this up, man.
Hell yeah! All right, so coolest. You want the coolest hunting memory I have?
Yeah, it could be, I mean, whatever the case is, memory of a particular bird, hunting memory, could be any of that stuff. So.
I got kind of a sad one. I honestly, like, everybody, you always like, falconry is sort of a mystical thing, right? We all talk about it's a rage, it's blah, blah, blah. So like my first red tail, so I trapped her. She was a good bird. Everybody has a good red tail, right? I had a pretty decent red tail, actually. She wasn't nasty. She caught a lot of crap despite me, etc. And she died on the power pole that she caught her first rabbit on 6 years later. So I always tell people, like, there's just some weird finality in that moment. I hunted her 20 times. This is a reflection on me. I hunted her 20 times and we didn't catch anything. My sponsor was like, oh, there's a spot. It's in this town. It's really good. She can't miss. Took her down there. She caught her first rabbit like clockwork, right? Some old head tells you what to do. You do it and it works. And then 6 years later on Christmas Day, I put her back up on the same pole line and she died on that power pole, straight 3-line pole with no transformer. And it's just, my dog died barking up the pole at a squirrel on the power pole. And I go, like, you got to just appreciate the moments of falconry. I think that's like the moral of that story is like, she's a good red tail. I haven't flown a red tail since, not because of some weird, like, psychological hitch, just be like, fuck, I didn't really want to fly a red tail since then, but it's sweet how it's cyclical. If you get deep enough into falconry, I'm an atheist. Everybody will hate me for that, but like, I am an atheist in that I don't believe in anything mystical, but there's some cool mysticism behind some weird event like that, right? Like, I took her to this pole on this shitty drizzly day. I should have known better. Now I'll never go back to the power poles like that. But there's a cool loop in that, right? And that I think only things that you have to get in so completely can have cool, weird touchback experiences. 6 years later, it took me right back to that first rabbit catch. I could picture how she caught it in the grass, like the exact posture, the exact angle. I think I could walk you back to like within 6 inches of the piece of willow that she caught that rabbit on, right? And then when she died on that pole, you look up and you go, it was at that moment you're like, oh, this is that pole. You got to be kidding me. You take a picture of it, you look, you go, it's that pole. And falconry is sweet because, like, I mean, that's where you get those experiences. I'm sure people find it with hunting or with other things too, but really, really rich shit like that. And it sounds sad to say that, but like, she caught like, 500-600 head, 6-7 seasons, had a great bird. And honestly, like, dodged the axe a lot, along those 100 head or those hundreds of head. And that's cool. Like, there's some weird mysticism in that. I'll never fly that spot again. It's just bizarre. I go there with people and I'll point at the pole and be like, yeah, that's a good pole for your red tail to catch their first rabbit off. Cause it is.
It is crazy. Yeah, like there's a lot of irony for sure. And those kind of things. Like, I know there's it seems like every falconer has this kind of like cursed spot that they should just never go to because something bad always happens for sure. Like my my sponsor had one of those also. There was this one particular tree line, and the first time I went there with him, his cast of Harris's ended up catching a squirrel there, and he's not a squirrel guy. He's one of those old school like squirrel hawking's bad kind of people, right? But his Harris's caught a squirrel and was trying to reach in and dispatch, and the squirrel bit the hell out of his hand, and that was the one time. We went back a different time, and a red tail that he was flying at the time. This was like the season like before that or whatever. Ended up chasing after a great horned owl and got into a great horned owl, scuffle and stuff. And so like he doesn't ever go back to that spot either. It's funny how, there's if you're superstitious or whatever, whatever your belief system is, I mean, there's always things that there's always like coincidental ironies and things that we do. But yeah, in regards to that, it's kind of like it's you can't get much more of an ironic circle of life like
Crazy,
example
right?
than that for sure.
It's the very same poll without exaggeration, and it's a safe poll. It blows my mind, but like that and I say like it's sad, like a weird, depressing story to bring up, but it's not really. Like she flew 6 seasons, was a great hawk, and like I learned a shitload. But it's just weird how like everything is really fragile. And I had my one Harris hawk a couple years ago, 9th rabbit. I was going to fly 10 rabbits with each hawk individually because the one was slacking off the previous season. I was like, all right, catch 10 rabbits each, then I'll put you together. And on rabbit 9, he broke his leg like catastrophically. Hit the ground, like rolled the rabbit up and came up just like laying over on his leg. And like you just learn like it's enjoy the moment, like enjoy the moment as it's working. I can't, like I struggle in the moment, like I'm like enjoying it. Like Ian will joke, it's this video of me trying to videotape his hawk catch the first duck ever. And I ended up videotaping the ground and me hollering and cheerleading his hawk into catching it. And it's like I do live in the moment. And people got to do that. Like you got to enjoy it. If you can get it on video, that's fucking sweet. Double, now you can relive that moment. But live in the moment, accept the privilege that we're here. We're doing something pretty sweet, and it's fun. That's it. Like that'd be my big thing. And get out and do it. Like you got to go out. You got to go to the meets, go to the next town over, go ask for permission. It's like whatever you got to do to get out and just do it. If you got to set some stupid goal to make yourself push harder, set the goal. If you got to tell your dog you want your dog to catch 10 rabbits, and in the process your hawk's going to catch 100, like that's a good plan. It's all about getting yourself out there. It's a great way to like get in shape. I say that's so dumb, but like it's a good way to be physically active and go have some trivial fun. Right? Like,
yeah.
It just is what it is. Like falconry is so sweet, and it's such a deep well. Like you could dump thousands of hours into this thing and barely scratch the surface, right?
For sure.
So rare.
They label, the apprentice, general, master, but I mean, we all know that you never really get to that last level, like ever. For the most part, there's always a new level that you can hit, or a new benchmark, or new experience that you can have. And yeah, man, it's been a fun conversation though. I mean, thanks for coming down and being willing to be a part of it, and it's been great meeting you and stuff today. I like I said, there's so many places that I want to try and hit up, and so many more people that I want to try and meet and everything. I hope that I'll be able to somehow link up with you again this season and manage to hit some more of those milestones, man.
Yes.
We'll see. My goal for the season is just to not have a bird die, and to be able to to make it through without too many issues. That's anymore. That's my basic goal for myself these days.
This year I want my dog to point a sharp tail, and I want to catch something with a passage peregrine. That'd be like, I mean, it seems one thing, right? Mm-hmm. But one thing, and have my dog point a sharp tail. It'd be a successful season, right? It's you change, you modify. And again, that's why falconry is so sweet. You can make it a number, you can make it one, you can make it a perfect flight. Like whatever the goal is for you, like nail it and then go out and do it. And like along the way, you're going to incidentally have shitloads of fun. Like, yeah. And people are cool. Like don't buy the hype that NAFA is crusty. If anyone's listening, like, about that shit, NAFA's a blast. You'll make friends there. You'll find friends there. Bring your friends there. Whatever. Just figure it out. Like, falconry is so cool, man. It is such a cool sport. So rare. That I'm like the hype man, right? So if anyone needs a brush beater that also is like show up on site and be like, let's do this. Like, that's kind of me, right? So I guess that's it.
We all need those kind of people in our lives occasionally,
There
even though sometimes it can be painful.
That's okay. You only have to hang out with me like once a month, so it works out easy. But yeah, let's get together and let's everybody like get together, go out, clobber some shit. It doesn't matter, like, as long as it's ethical. Falconry is a really rad thing, So yeah.
Well, let's call this good and go like clobber some food or some more freaking booze or something, man. I'm gonna need something in my stomach before too long here. But one last cheers here, real quick, and we'll call this good, buddy.
Cheers and burgers and Altoona. Rock and roll.
Perfect, man.